All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your host, Gaius and Jackson. A special anniversary episode, actually recording the day before this film's 25th anniversary officially. We're recording April 8th today on a Monday. Another trip back to the class of 99, but not a teen film that we've been covering most of March. This is well, I guess it does have a little bit of a youth culture spin, but it's definitely not a traditional
teen movie, not at all. And I didn't even get that impression throughout it. There's actually a moment in this film where one of the main characters mentions that they're 17, and it kind of took me aback. I was like, oh, I just did not anticipate that they were this young. I don't even know if she was lying about her age or not, but didn't feel that way at all. But definitely, you're right. There's a youth culture spin to this movie that kept it, for the young audiences. It was a nice blend. It was awesome, though. It was a fantastic movie talking about. And I need your help. I don't even know if I've ever been pronouncing the director's name right. Very well-known, acclaimed film director, Doug. I say Liman. Is it Liman?
Liman. Yeah.
Okay. Tomato.
Now you know. Now you know.
But one of his first movies, Go, came out in 1999. That's what we're covering today. Surprise, surprise. I had never seen, let alone even heard of this movie until you mentioned it to cover for the anniversary episode. And not gonna lie, my initial thoughts, not of the movie, but of just like when I IMDb'd it, I'm looking at the poster right now. I thought, I don't know. I just don't think this is gonna be for me.
It doesn't really sell it the way it
doesn't
should be
sell
sold.
it. No, it doesn't. Happy to report though, I thought this movie was super slick.
Yeah, I think, which is why we'll talk about it a little bit. It underperformed box office wise, but it was critically acclaimed. Like critics loved it, and it's since become a cult classic. But I think part of the difficulty here was how to promote it for what it was. And I mentioned this when I pitched the idea to do it. I remember telling you, I was like, hey, I really want to cover Go as like one of my picks, and I was trying to describe it to you, and I was like, hey, it's kind of described by a lot of people as like kind of like a Pulp Fiction for younger people. And then I was like, but don't think it's not like on the level of Pulp Fiction. You're like, oh no, I'm assuming it's not, but like it's the film style and the non-linear storytelling that became kind of big post 100%. Pulp Fiction, and a lot of critics compared it in a very positive way to Pulp Fiction in that sense, and I think that's why it's kind of got discovered a lot years and years later. Especially, I think other people were trying to discover more of Doug Liman's early films because his debut was Swingers, and then he did this right after that. And then after this, he did The Bourne Identity, which is weird.
Right. Very different. Totally tonal shift, genre shift. Like very. I was thinking about that. I'm looking at his IMDb profile right now, and I can't imagine. Maybe you'd have some insight into this. What was it like, or were you even following the production of The Bourne Identity when he got cast as the director? Were people like, what the fuck is he gonna do with this movie? I thought that would be weird, to have him do that at that time.
I do remember there was a little bit of like kind of like, oh, that guy kind of sits to it. Now it's interesting is that Bourne Identity is very good, but I think and it is a great introduction to that franchise, and he
100%.
I think he did prove that he could film action, and I think he kind of doubled down on that when he did Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and he's really good at he became very good at it. But I think with that franchise, I think they found a better fit with Paul Greengrass, who took that over, and
100%.
And those sequels became, I think they kind of set their own stage for what action was at that time. And I don't really think that Bourne Identity really defined that, but the sequels did. But not to say that what he did with it wasn't good. I just think that I also think at that time too. I think now if you take a director who did smaller independent movies and have them direct an action film, it's more commonplace now. They do it a lot with like Marvel movies where they take smaller directors and give them like these enormous budgets to do movies like that. But back then, I think it was a bit of a surprise because that's a big departure from Swingers and Go.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think he stuck it with The Bourne Identity. And while Paul Greengrass made those following movies bigger and badder and more epic, I think that he did a great job opening that universe of Jason Bourne, and it still is I think my only complaint, and it's a lot of people's complaint for The Bourne Identity, is kind of the shaky cam, which is very of its time and popular in action movies in the early 2000s. Not his fault. I don't think. He was just kind of doing what was popular, but still the movie holds up. I watched it not that long ago, maybe a couple of years, and still a great entry.
I need to rewatch all of those. I haven't watched a lot of them in one, like as a whole
in one go. They're a lot of fun. My dad loved them when I was growing up.
And then the writer of this movie, John August, like you'll find that his writing filmography is all over the place too. He wrote.
I didn't look at him yet. Okay.
He wrote the Charlie's Angels movie in 2000. The year after this, he wrote Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. He wrote Big Fish, which is a great movie. He wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, Frankenweenie, and the live action adaptation of Aladdin. So he has been all over the place in terms of the movies that he does. But Go was his first screenplay to actually get produced, and just to hit the making of Go is very interesting because it is sorry. I mean, it was an independent film first, and then the financing company that was going to do it, their financing it fell through, and they had to find another company last minute to pick it up. And TriStar picked it up at the last minute, and they, of course, merged into Columbia Pictures, and then they gave them a little bit more money, and then suddenly it was still an indie film, but it had studio sensibilities now, and they were able to put a little bit more of a push into the marketing. But even so, the marketing still, I think it sold it as a fun kind of, like, it's interesting too, because like usually say you don't really watch trailers or anything before we do these. You kind of go in a little blind.
Kind of going blind, yeah, 100%. Yep.
And just so I hadn't watched the trailer, I watched the trailer before we came on for this, and it's a good trailer. It sells it as like a fun, kind of visceral, kind of kinetic experience, and that's what it is. But I also think in that it works in that sense, but it also doesn't completely sell what the movie is about either, because I think it's hard to explain that we have three different storylines that are working together, and they all center around this kind of drug deal at the heart of it, and then and then kind of spiders off into other different things. So like, I think it's a tough sell for sure.
It might sound weird to say, because I know the entire nature of a movie trailer is to give you an elevator pitch of what the movie is going to be about, but I like when a trailer doesn't give you much and doesn't tell you and give you everything, every plot beat of the story in its 2 to 2.5 minutes. So that's nice, and that's generally why I don't really go out of my way to watch trailers, because I don't want everything spoiled. It's hard when a trailer drops for a movie that you're anticipating and you've been following the production and you just can't wait to get your first look at it. But more often than not, I'm kicking myself for watching trailers because they give so much away. So but that's interesting. I think that's actually might have worked in this movie's favor, because nothing more annoying than having stuff spoiled for you. But it's interesting that you say it doesn't really tell you what it's about at all. That's strange.
It's hard. I mean, you can tell that it's fun. It kind of revolves around like this kind of big night, kind of. Yeah. But I think what it really sold was like the visuals and the experience, and then also really mentioning that it has a stacked cast who some of them established, some of them went on to do great things later, and just so people, before I get your like initial thoughts on it, I just want to remind people of who's in it. We got William Fichtner, Katie Holmes, Jay Mohr, Sarah Polley, Scott Wolf, Taye Diggs, Breckin Meyer, Timothy Olyphant, Desmond Askew, Jane Krakowski, J.E. Freeman, Melissa McCarthy in her film debut. She has one scene. If you caught it,
I did. I was like 80% sure it was her, but I actually wasn't positive it was Melissa McCarthy. But yeah,
James Duval is in this movie as well. A really, really fun cast of, and a lot of them cast in the movie before. Like Katie Holmes had done the pilot for Dawson's Creek, but it hadn't aired yet when she got cast. So now by the time it comes out in 99, she is already a star on Dawson's Creek. But it's one of those kind of like good, kind of happy, I guess, miracles for them to now she's a little bit more popular. Sarah Polley, they always wanted Sarah Polley, but at the time, even though she was young then, and it seems like she would want to do like the Hollywood thing, she did not want to shoot movies in LA. She's from Canada, and didn't really like the idea of shooting movies in LA. So it was a tough sell at first, but then they told a really funny story on the Blu-ray where Doug Liman had only one copy of the script to give her before she had to fly back to Toronto. And in the script was all these notes from the screenwriter that said, "This is stupid, change this." Like all these like really like notes that would make you like maybe turn off an actress and be like, "I don't want to do this. Why you think all this is bad?"
Right.
But he thinks that she appreciated the honesty of that was the only copy he had. And she's like, you know what? I see something good mixed into stuff that you want to change, and I want to be a part of it. And that was the only choice, I guess, for that part. That Christina Ricci was briefly considered.
Okay.
But they really wanted Sarah Polley, and I think that was a really good choice too, because she's a really good, fun lead.
I've not seen Sarah Polley act very much. I'm trying to think.
Until recently, right? Until you did with Dawn of the Dead. She's in that.
Dawn of the Dead, right? I forgot. Yes, that's right. But I've seen her. Was it her debut in Women Talking? Was that her directorial debut?
I believe so.
She's a great director from what I've seen, but and I remember being surprised that she had an acting career before. When I saw that she was the director of Women Talking, I just assumed she was just, new to the industry, just kind of bursting onto the scene. But from what I've seen in her, couple roles that I've watched, she is a great little actress, and she was awesome in Go.
Yep. And the film is set around Christmas, which is kind of funny. Yeah, it is on a list of a lot of people's favorite unconventional Christmas movies. A woman purchases ecstasy pills, covertly disposes of them, and then sells fake pills at a rave. That's one of the stories. And she's later confronted by an armed drug dealer. And from there, we have these intertwining plots involving three sets of characters, with Rana, Simon, Adam, and Zach being the main three stories that we see. And of course, there's all the kind of secondary characters like Katie Holmes. Katie Holmes' Claire doesn't have her own story per se, but she gets a fun little thing towards the end of the movie. That probably her biggest moment with Timothy the Olyphant. And I don't know, just a really fun kind of ensemble, little offbeat crime comedy movie, I guess, to describe it.
100%.
Yeah. What did you think about it when you were watching it?
Well, like I said, I went in with not the highest expectations. I know you should never judge a book by its cover or a movie by its poster, yet I was guilty of that. And pretty soon in the movie, I was pretty much all in. I was hooked into the initial, I didn't really know about the whole revolving plot or perspectives, with different characters seeing the same situation from different perspectives. That was neat. And honestly, Pulp Fiction never came to my mind until after I was reading some reviews, but then I was thinking, this was definitely inspired, you can tell. But the cast I thought was great. It's always fun seeing actors pop up and knowing them for years and then seeing them in some of their breakout roles or earlier works. So that was a lot of fun. Timothy Olyphant, as soon as he was on screen, he was an instant favorite character for me. I thought he was fantastic.
He feels like a real drug dealer.
Actually. He does.
It really feels like he's
delivery. The lines written for him are super clever and fun to deliver, and he does a great job at not a guy that I would think is intimidating, but in this role, he does come across as a sinister, evil kind of drug dealer, even though he doesn't really do anything too sinister. He has this menacing presence to him. I thought he was awesome. One of my favorite parts of the movie was his performance. Katie Holmes was good in her role. I mean, you're right. She doesn't have too much to do until the end of it, but I thought I know her, my earliest experience with her was in 2005 in Batman Begins, and this is 6 years before that. So this is very young Katie Holmes for what I've seen her in, and I thought she was, very, very confident in her role at the age. I don't know how old she was during filming. I don't know if you know.
But I think she's 18, 19. So
wow.
She's really young.
Yeah. But very commanding in the little that she has to do until the last act. I thought it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was super, super fun thrill ride. And again, I guess maybe not knowing what to expect going in, it really helped me in this case because I was along for every twist and turn. But I know that you wanted to cover this, so you had seen it before, but what was your experience with it? Did you see it in theaters? How long ago did you last see it? Give us a scoop.
I saw it in theaters opening weekend. Because we all thought the trailers, even though we couldn't really tell what the movie was exactly about, we thought it looked fun.
Had you seen Swingers? Were you anticipating?
I had not seen. What's funny is that I hadn't seen Swingers. I saw Swingers after this. It made me want to see it.
Okay.
And I saw that, so I'm in the minority where I saw this first.
Okay.
Maybe other people have seen this first and then gone to that, but yeah, I saw this first. I was more into. I loved, at least from what they were selling the trailers, I loved the look of it, and I think that's when I was starting to. I had seen Pulp Fiction, and that it does kind of have a similar visual aesthetic to that, and it's kind of, and then once we saw the movie and the storytelling is very kind of similar-ish to it as far as the interconnecting non-linear storytelling and all that. But yeah, my friends and I loved it when we saw it in the theaters. Wasn't like it was an empty theater, but we could tell that it wasn't on the level of the other movies we were seeing around that time. I remember when that because at this point me and my friends are following box office at this point, seeing how movies are doing, and we saw what it opened to. I think it only opened to $4.7 million. I was like, oh, that's a bummer that this didn't really catch on. But what I learned, of course, in subsequent years is that people have certainly discovered it more when it came out on home video and then DVD and then Blu-ray, and it has really had another life since then.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of these movies that we've covered, they've become kind of cult classics. And I think a lot of people discover them for different reasons. For like I know recently, so my friend found out by accident that Sarah Polley was in this because he was just trying to see if she had directed other stuff or done other stuff, and it was like, oh, she has like a whole filmography as an actress, and that's how we watched this. And then I had another friend who was a big fan of Timothy Olyphant, but I'd never seen this, and I recommended it to him, and he was like, oh, this was amazing, and he thought that Timothy Olyphant was probably the best person in the movie other than Sarah Polley. They're all good.
But, for sure. I agree. Timothy Olyphant stole the show for me.
He steals a lot of his scenes. And I thought it was interesting too that before I forget it, Doug Liman made a comment on the behind the scenes thing I was watching before we started. And he said that he wanted to make it clear in certain scenes that when you meet his character at night, that he feels a little bit more seedy and like kind of like a little bit more dangerous. And then later in the movie, when it's daytime and Claire runs into him at the diner, and then the rest of the movie that we see him in, he's not, at least on screen, doesn't appear as dangerous and seedy. Like during the daylight, he feels like someone that Claire would talk to and not be afraid to talk to. And he tried to make that difference. And like when I listened to that and then thought about those, the juxtaposition of that, I was like, oh, it does make sense because he feels like a dirtier character when you first meet him, and then by the time you see him at the diner with Claire, he doesn't seem as bad.
No, 100%. Not intimidating. Like his guard is down, sort of thing.
Yeah. And as when I last watched it, God, it's been like 10 years before.
Oh wow.
This. And and people think it's crazy when I mention that on here because I own the movie. I could easily pop it in.
Right. But I mean, there's a million movies that you're wanting to watch too. So what caught your attention to bring it up in our April anniversaries? Like why did you want to come back to cover it? Because you hadn't seen it in a while, or?
I hadn't seen it in a while, and I remember loving it. And one of the other guys who has been on the show before your time, this guy Anthony, he does the Cult Worthy podcast, and he's been on the show maybe 2 or 3 times, and he covered this movie during Christmas because he was like, it was a fun Christmas movie,
right?
And
totally.
I listened to that episode, and I was like, oh yeah. As they're talking about it, I was remembering all these things that I liked about it. And I also knew that it was a smaller movie from this period, but a movie that eventually caught on later, and I thought it'd be a good one to kind of discuss. And honestly, knowing that you had never seen it, it's also fun to like pick these and see like, all right, what's he gonna think, and then wait in dread and terror to see if you like it or not,
and then have the conversation. More often than not lately, though, I've been enjoying our class of '99 entries. It's been a lot of fun, and this was definitely one that I would rate high amongst those for sure.
Yeah,
I thought it was quite
interesting thing too, though. I wanted to ask you because a lot of these movies that came out that year, they feel like you mentioned before, like they very feel like some of them are of their time. Did this feel like a 1999 movie when you were watching it, or was there anything about it that felt like it could be timeless? Or
yeah, it did have somewhat of a. I wouldn't go like fully timeless. Part of it, it's hard when you're biased when you recognize how young that these actors that are in this movie. So obviously I know, this is, young Timothy Olyphant, young Katie Holmes, young Sarah Polley. But like that aside, really the only thing that grounded this movie in the late 90s, early 2000s for me was the score. It was a very like techno electronic sort of like late 90s sort of soundtrack. I don't even know, or score. I don't know if it was a soundtrack or a score, if these were actual songs that existed that were put into this.
Some of them were, so what I learned is that a lot of the music like on set or while they're editing, they have like what they call like temp tracks that they'll like either play when they're on set or like do it in editing. And most of the temp tracks they were able to use by up and coming artists at the time. Even though this wasn't a huge movie, No Doubt recorded a new song for the movie. It's the song New that plays at the end. It also plays a little bit right when the lady is reaching for their orange juice, and then they pull it back from her. So that song is like, so a band like No Doubt was huge in 1999, and the fact that they wanted to make an original song for that movie was a big deal at the time. I forgot how much I love this soundtrack too. I used to own it.
There
are a lot of songs in this movie that I definitely still play today. And but yeah, a lot of it, like BT did the score, and a lot of it was his original creation, and then they just want to make sure that because club culture and stuff wasn't huge in movies at the time, so this was like one of the first movies to really showcase that culture in a significant way, and it gets a lot of credit for that too, as far as kind of showing music like that and shining a light on music like that too.
On that note, I'd read afterwards that Doug Liman himself had never been to a rave until filming, and supposedly quite enjoyed them. So I don't know if he became something of a raver afterwards, but I thought that was kind of funny. I didn't realize that they were that elusive or not as common as they were when I was growing up and even today. So that was funny.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. On one thing, I think they say on the behind the scenes stuff, the editor, I think his name is Stephen Maroney. He, I guess they asked him after he cut, not even the whole movie, but I guess the opening, which it has the Columbia Pictures logo, and then it's spliced in with like the kind of opening of the rave and like music and all that.
Yeah.
And I guess when he cut that opening, they asked him if he had ever done ecstasy, and he was like, no. And Doug Liman had never done it either. And then I guess the compliment they said they got from people who had saw that opening, and then even the whole movie, they were like, you really capture what it's like to feel like you're on that. And they were like, oh, well, I guess we did a good job then. Good.
Glad you bring that. That's super impressive to know, unless they were just lying, because I also thought when I was watching Manny trip out on ecstasy, because funny little detail, I don't think it ever really gets addressed, but when Rana, when Sarah Polley's character buys the ecstasy originally from Timothy Olyphant's drug dealing character, he is like kind of going over the, in broad strokes, like the rules of taking them. He goes, make sure you only give one dose to each person, whatever. But we see Manny take two while she's out of the car, and it's never addressed. She never tells him not to take, because he kind of snuck them in, and we see how bad he's tripping while taking them. I thought that was a slick little detail that like it tells the audience, oh, he's definitely done more than he probably should have, but without it really being addressed by the character. So I thought that was a pretty cool detail. But I remember watching him inside Timothy Olyphant's apartment, kind of backing up Rana, but just standing there silently and like kind of tripping out in the room was one of the better depictions of drug use I've seen, or like more memorable, accurate depictions in cinema that I've seen. I thought it was a completely different drug, but kind of comparable to the LSD scenes in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That is totally what you would imagine it would be like. I have no experience with either, but I would imagine that's what it would be like. So watching Manny trip out on ecstasy, I was like, this is such a great job. I didn't know if Doug Liman had any experience with it, but super interesting to find out that he didn't know what it would be like, because he did a great job. And the editor too, I guess a lot of credit would go to him. But in particularly, and I like that it wasn't really played for laughs, but it was taken seriously when the cat is like talking to Manny, and it's just like comes in subtitles. Thought that was super funny. He goes like, you're gonna die. That was hilarious. Got a good chuckle out of me.
And I love that Rana has a line when they're walking back up to Todd's house after the whole debacle with the drugs, and she says something that like what most friends would probably say if you obviously looked high, and she's like trying to like say all this stuff, and before they get to the door, she's like, and try not to look so stoned. And he's like, you can tell that he's like trying so hard.
The last thing you probably want to hear.
And the thing is, Nathan Bexton, who plays him, I think it's always hard sometimes when I watch actors either play drunk or high, because they either over exaggerate it and it doesn't seem genuine. It seems like it's overacting. I bought him being completely.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was on ecstasy while filming. Sweating bullets. Frantic look. Like he looked like genuinely terrified. I thought it was a super great depiction of that drug use. It was awesome.
Since this movie is 3 different stories, and the ones we get introduced, Rana is the first of the main ones that we are introduced to. What did you think of? I'll get your evaluation of the 3 of them after going through them. But like, what did you think of her story to kind of kick off the movie?
I honestly really enjoyed it. Like, part of me wishes that we just followed more of her night, because I thought it was
a lot of people say that too.
I like though that like we split and see these intersecting, interwoven, character plots and how they kind of tie into each other. I didn't really feel like the middle segment tied in much to the overall story. I guess it does rear its head in the end. But I feel like Sarah Polley's character is like the main one, and perhaps it's a little bit of recency bias because we start the story off from her perspective, but to the point where she gets hit by the car and we don't really know who had done it, and then it kind of flips to Simon's perspective. I was like, oh damn, I kind of wanted to see where more of that went. I just really bought Rana as a character and the decision she was making. Again, I don't know if I'm probably just looking too much into it, but she does tell a few characters at one point that she's only 17. I think she just has this confidence and this like swagger that makes her come across a lot older. And there's no mention of school or where they're really at in their lives. They're all just clerks at a grocery store. Yeah, kind of irrelevant. But I thought like, the balls that she has when she realizes. So I guess for people that maybe haven't seen it, just to follow along. So she's approached by these two people in the grocery store to try and find some drugs for them. And she kind of takes it upon herself to bypass her usual dealer and go right to the supplier and get them from him, who's Timothy Olyphant's character. And then when she's going to deliver these drugs she's doing it to get this money to pay her.
She's about to get evicted.
Yeah, exactly. To pay her rent. I was going to say tuition, but so that's kind of what her motivation for doing this deal is. And then she gets to the house where the guys are to give them the drugs, and she kind of gets a suspicion that this might sort of be a setup, and flushes them and gets out of there. And then now she's out the pills and had been fronted the money. So she's in a very much of a tough spot, and decides to go and find some just like over the counter pills to substitute the ecstasy and get her money back.
Allergy medicine.
Allergy meds, exactly. So I was like, the confidence to do this and pull this off on someone that knows where you work and probably live, or at least could find out relatively easy. I know it's kind of she was stuck between a rock and a hard place, but I just thought that whole dynamic, setting up the story from there, was such a great hook that I was super on board with. It honestly kind of reminded me, this movie felt like it could have been like a Guy Ritchie movie, but American. I really thought a lot of parallels, and he also just directs a lot of like crime comedies, like Go is, and I love Guy Ritchie's movies, so I was kind of making those connections a lot throughout. But really, really interested in that hook. It was a great way to open the story, and so after she kind of makes off with the pills and starts selling them for profit at the rave, and then kind of gets hit by the car, and it kind of transitions to another person's perspective, I was like kind of taken out of it for a second. I was like, I wanted to see where this will go.
I want more of her,
And I guess we do. By the end of it, we do get a glimpse of what happens to her at the end. But probably my favorite segment overall was hers. But I don't think the movie detracts when we leave her perspective. I really like the other two segments too. Definitely a great opening first 30 minutes of the movie. I thought it was really, really well done, really well directed, acted, and written, which, the trifecta was complete. What's your favorite segment though of the three, would you say?
I do, what's funny is that I think the Vegas one with Simon is fun, but and I will say I'm saying this not to say I don't think it still fits there. I think it is the most unnecessary of the three. Like, it feels like it's just kind of plopped in, and I know the tangible connection is Simon, because he's like he's the guy that they normally would get the stuff from, and now he's in Vegas, and he got Rhonda to take his shift and paid her to do it. So that's why you find out later that Adam and Zach were expecting Simon, and then they get Rhonda instead, who has taken his shift because he's in Vegas. And I know there's tangible connections there with the Vegas story, but it just kind of feels like, that was fun, a fun way to spend 30 minutes, I guess, of the movie. But when I watched it for this, while I was thoroughly entertained, I was like, I didn't really get much narratively from it, but whatever.
I agree. I think a small detail that would have went a long way is if just having set that segment in the same town. It doesn't have to be Vegas necessarily. You can do all the things they do in Vegas in this small town in LA, and kind of have them intersect, and it would still have the same implications later in the story. So I just kind of felt like the Vegas thing was more like showboaty than narrative driven, like you just said. Still liked it. Still thought it was fun. It did give. There's a few sequences in there that I think would have prepped Doug Liman's direction for the Bourne
action.
Yeah, exactly.
You find out they were like, I guess when TriStar picked it up, they were like, hey, this is great, we love the script, but that Vegas chase is probably going to have to go because it's going to be over budget. And so what he did was he's like, no, I still want to keep it. So he cut corners elsewhere in order to still keep that chase in. And they talk a lot about his pace on these movies. Like Jay Mohr said, like, I had never worked on something where they shot just so much. And I guess Jay Mohr had went out on a night of partying before his first day of shooting.
Oh boy.
And then when the next day he was shooting all day, and he was like, I so used to be able to go like take a nap in my trailer for a bit, but that's not the way Doug Liman, like they wanted to get the movie done quickly. And in order to do that sometime is to you film a lot, and so you get everything out of the way. And so all these actors some of them were like James Duval, who's in the Vegas story, the one who's not Breckin Meyer. He's the other guy that gets sick from eating the shrimp cocktail. He had done a bunch of independent movies, so he was used to that pace. But he said like the way Doug Liman was doing it was even different from how he was exposed to that kind of filmmaking. They all ended up liking it and informed all their performances and kind of kept them in that kind of wired headspace while they were filming it. Because John August, because usually screenwriters are not on set after they sell a script, but he was there every day. And they said that since most of the movie was filmed at night, they felt from like 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. every day for 25 days. So that's how, and so they said if anything, just the shooting schedule added to how maybe everyone kind of looked and felt while they were
no doubt.
And you kind of get this, like, it's, I always think it's interesting when there's raves or a club scene or something in the movie, and just having been to clubs and stuff like that, when it feels like, oh, this feels like a club scene from a film, or when it feels like a genuine experience. And I feel like Doug Liman captured a genuine experience. Like,
agreed. I don't know how he fit cameras into those crowds. It felt like they're shoulder to shoulder in these rave scenes. Yeah, and that's kind of felt authentic. So I'm like, where were these camera crews, and how much space were they taking up, and were people bumping into them?
And the editor said that editor said like Doug came back. He said Doug Liman came back with just all these like, just between the actual scenes of the actors at the rave and then just going on his own to get basically like B-roll. He said that he had all these shots from these events, and he was just like, it really captured the energy of it. And again, we mentioned it earlier. He was like, I don't know how he really got that, not knowing that experience, but he certainly captured it.
Absolutely.
In a real way. You really are in that headspace when you're watching it. It really feels like a completely authentic experience, which is probably why I do like the Rana story. It feels like more of a complete story. There are more interesting characters in that story.
Yep.
And Sarah Polley is just a really good. I buy her as that character. Like again, we talked about before where actors don't feel like they're acting. That felt like a genuine character. And actually, Manny and Claire, Nathan Bexton and Katie Holmes, all three of them feel like friends on some level. Definitely. Like they really felt like I love it. We might have to do this on the show one day when they play that dead celebrity game and to see who goes out to the front. Like that, even little moments like that, that sells that relationship and that friendship, and like what you kind of do when you're working at a place like that. Like if it's either grocery store, restaurant, whatever, like that's kind of some of the things that you do in order to kind of
survive the day
a little bit. So it's stuff like that was fun. And of course, Timmy, we talked about him. I think he's a great part of that story too. And Rana is just out of everyone a more interesting character, I think.
Very much. And it's definitely her story too, at least to begin with. So,
and I'm glad that you said that, once that first story was over, you were like, oh, I wish we'd spent more with her in her night. Almost every person who I know has seen this movie or I've shown it to, they've all said that. They have all said, like, I wish we would have stayed with her longer, or and not that they didn't like the other stories. It's just hers was the most interesting and a lot of fun too. And I just love all the little things that you notice in the script, like when Adam and Zach hit her up for the deal at the grocery store, and then she's bagged up all this orange juice for them, whatever, right? And she goes to the house. She already feels like something is off because they're acting weird. They're acting like
there's another guy there that doesn't seem like he's their friend.
And they're acting like they've never done this before too. Like their whole demeanor, they seem really nervous, and you can kind of see it in her eyes where she's like shifting, like something's off. And then they're like, "Do you want anything to drink?" And she's like, "Oh, some of that orange juice would be great." And when he comes back from the kitchen, and she's like, "Oh, we're fresh on the orange, but we have cerveza," and she's like, "Yeah, something's not right." And I love little callbacks like that. Like that was really cool. And then just that kind of pace of her having to dump all that while he's outside the door, and you're just like, oh, I hope she gets it done in time, and she does, and it's a really great scene, great moment.
When she opens the door and she goes, "It's all yours," and you think, "Oh, she's gonna get caught in the act," and yet again, she's always kind of one step ahead, gets everything done right in the nick of time. I thought that was really sick. She showed no signs of being intimidated. She just felt like she was on the ball, and for someone that we've never seen before as a character, she felt like she really fit into this world. Like she knew what she was doing, even though from a character perspective, she probably was in over her head. She just did a great job at not letting her guard down and not, I guess, just rolling with the punches and staying on her feet, which I thought was super believable and that's all due to Sarah Polley. Is it just me, or is William Fichtner always a police officer or like some authority figure? He's one of those actors that's always in a position of control or authority. And it was funny when I saw him on screen, I was like, oh, okay. I didn't really know exactly what his role was going to be, but then to find out he's a police officer or a narcotics agent or whatever he is, I was like, oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because once she gets through that, you're like, oh, she's done. She's out of it. Then you kind of forget, like, oh, wait, no, she doesn't have the drugs anymore. So what's she going to do now?
Yeah. I thought they made it for a great, what do you call it? Just like a great trial and tribulation for her to now confront. Yeah. Not the word I was looking for, but same idea.
And what's cool too, even in a few scenes before that, you have, at least in their scenes together, Sarah Polley is the risk taker, and clearly Claire is like. It's funny. I read an article about the movie, and John August said that out of all the characters that he wrote, they said he was most like Claire, like the wet blanket who has more fun later and more fun fun than he realized that she realized she's gonna have until later in the movie, and I guess she is the wet blanket of the bunch. But it's kind of funny. Like that's usually funny to watch when you have like the more straight person playing against the more like person who's willing to take those chances. Like when she has a whole discussion with Todd, and she's like, "Well, what if I leave something here with you?" Because she's like trying to do this whole like, she's like, "Hey, this is how much money I have. This is what you usually do for Simon." And he's like, "Well," he's like, "Inflation is a bitch." And like, and then she was like, "Well, here's a down payment. And what if I leave something as like a collateral?" And the way it cuts to that scene with her just being like, "No," and they're like, "No," it's only 45 minutes. And like Katie Holmes at that time was kind of known as like the girl next door.
Okay.
And she kind of sells that in that moment of like being like the voice of reason, and then her very like serious, like, "No, he's a drug dealer. Like, she's not gonna like just wait in the house."
Right. You're making me an accessory.
Yeah, you're making it. And she's like, "That watch that you're wearing in mine, that's an accessory." I love that line too.
Yeah. You're just gonna be a girl in an apartment.
And then her scene with Timothy Olyphant is really fun to watch too, because you can tell that he's just trying to get something out of her, and she's so uncomfortable, and she's just sitting there like, and then,
when is this over?
And then Simon, and I love. I found out later that scene played really well, I guess, with test screeners, because they were like, "Hey, he's stealing that scene," but her being so uncomfortable is making that scene funny too. But I guess in a deleted scene, as more of the joke, after the Breakfast Club, Claire joke, he pulled a gun on her, and then it turned into a more serious scene to kind of intimidate her and scare her. And then they didn't like that so much. They kind of like this kind of flirtation thing that would seem to be going on, at least on his end. And they were like, if he pulls a gun on her, no matter how spun out or a little bit of high she is later, she's not going to want to go sit with him at a table at a diner if he's pulled a gun on her before that. So then they cut that. But
fair enough. I think that's a good call.
But yeah, their scenes together are really good. I just like, and I love when like she's like, "Well, what are you gonna do now? Because you don't have the pills or the money." And she's like tapping the pills on the steering wheel, and like Katie Holmes gives her this like disapprove, like, "What are you gonna do?"
Right.
And those scenes of her just selling them to those kids, and they all think they're high, and they're clearly not.
So relatable. I can think of so many, not necessarily with pills, but like it totally brought me back to like high school. There was a time where I didn't encounter this. I just heard the story where like I guess some friends had given someone in a younger grade like apple juice and told them that it had alcohol in it, and this person like pretended that they were super wasted when they weren't at all. And it made me think of that. I was like, this is so realistic. Like I think basically like this has happened in my town, so I could totally picture it. Hilarious. And she gets a red light from doing all that too. I almost was rooting for her, even though it was like super immoral. Yeah.
Yeah, when that guy like leans up and he's like, I think I feel something.
Yeah, you're like,
yeah,
oh boy, here we
and she's
go.
like, it's really smooth, isn't it? And then there's also a lot of fun little callbacks to like the time period. Like she calls her and Claire Kelly and Donna, and that's a reference to Beverly Hills 90210. So that's a fun little reference there. And then Katie Holmes is just so awkward because she's like, I think they're saying something in the car. She's just trying to like make conversations and like build character. And then she mentions something. I think it's Jim, like her uncle or something. And she's like, that was his name. And then like, and she kind of just leans back again and stops talking.
Right.
Like, I just love how uncomfortable she is in the situation, but kind of ride or die for her friend, no matter what.
Exactly.
It seems.
Who low-key gets manipulated into being in that scenario, but definitely a good friend.
Yeah, that whole scene where she's like, basically like, you have to do this to me, otherwise I'm going to end up on the street. I mean, you kind of wonder like if you were a friend and you're in that position and your friend tells you that, like, oh, well, what are you going to do? And you're like, all right, you don't want to seem like you're not down to help, but they're like, I don't want to get in trouble either, though.
Exactly.
Caught up, like, hanging out at drug dealers' houses is not ideal. So you're like, nah, doesn't sound like the best night ever. And I agree with you too. I love that Sarah Polley sells that confidence of just doing this, and then I don't think she realizes how in over her head she is until she actually has to see Todd again right before when he comes to the club and realizes that she fucked him over too, and he actually looks most menacing in that scene when he's like walking up on her in the parking lot because like he's gonna do something. He's gonna do something to her, and she's like trying to talk him down, and he's just like, no, that's not gonna work. And then I just love, again, Timothy Olyphant just being a great actor, the look of total befuddlement on his face when she gets hit by the car. Yeah. And he doesn't know what to do.
He's like, the problem just took care of itself, but I don't know what to do about it.
Exactly. But that first story is amazing. And I guess that was the genesis of the movie. It started as a short film called X, and that's what John August wrote. And then they mentioned these other characters in that short story, and and then he just expanded on those characters that were mentioned in the short story, and that's how you got the Vegas one, and of course the thing with Adam and Zach. Speaking of the Vegas one, I know we talked a little bit about it. What did you enjoy about it? At least I know you said that I think we both agree that it's a fun segment, but maybe not necessarily. It almost feels like filler, but at least it's fun filler. I don't know.
Yeah, it would feel more like filler if there weren't repercussions from it that do tie back into the main storyline, mostly to do with Simon using Todd's credit card. Also, what sort of drug dealer lends his credit card to his buddy to go use in Vegas? Felt like very trusting drug dealer.
He's a good guy. He's like, and Taye Diggs is like, oh yeah, he's a good drug dealer. I forgot about that.
I liked, I guess, the shenanigans that Simon got his friend group kind of tied up into, even though like for a lot of it, I was thinking, okay, like how dumb is this character? Like, obviously he is making things so much worse on himself, and typical like out of towner or foreigner kind of getting wrapped into the whole experience that he'd never had before, and kind of like doing these things that he would not normally do, and getting himself in a lot of trouble, and is having to get his like smarter friend to bail him out. So it led to like the decisions and stuff. I was like, okay, this is, a little bit felt like too foolish a little bit. Like I couldn't really buy a character being this naive and being that. But maybe, I don't know, but I just liked, and I don't know if I ever caught Marcus. Yeah. Marcus kind of getting them out of the situations, was a big highlight of that scenario. And it felt like nonstop from this, once they get into the, even hotel fire aside, when they get to the strip club, and Simon just can't help himself from touching the dancers after being explicitly warned not to. Yeah. I thought he was just kind of the character to get kind of just go down with the ship. But when he actually takes the gun that was found in the car and, shoots the bouncer in the arm and to get them out of there, that's kind of when things get turned into high gear. And then from then on, it was Doug Liman goes into sort of Jason Bourne directing mode, where he's got the car chase around Las Vegas. The
actually a pretty good car chase for a movie that costs that little. I mean,
$20 million budget, right?
Budget, yeah, which is like great for something that small. And I love like the use of like Magic Carpet Ride, that song that they played like over much of that chase scene. It really well done for a director who hadn't really done anything like that before then. So
that was all good sequence. Again, like I really think what ties it together is that the strip club bouncers are able to trace those guys back to LA via the credit card that they had used on the hotel and left behind at the scene too. If not, then if that hadn't happened, I mean, I knew that it had to, tie in and have repercussions to the story, but it wasn't really until then that I felt like, okay, this kind of justifies the last 30 minutes of the movie. It was still good fun, and watching the guys, get in over their head in a different city was fun to watch, but tying it back to the Sarah Polley story was really the bread and butter of that.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I guess when they were putting the movie together, the one studio note was, so it's not confusing to the audience, they were like, you need to, at the beginning of these stories, at least you need to loop it back to the beginning of them, like him, asking her to take a shift and the whole mistletoe thing at the beginning as well. Yeah. I guess that wasn't there at first. They were like, you're going to confuse people if they don't know that we start here, but we're seeing it through someone else's perspective. So I can't imagine if that wasn't there. I mean, I guess you would have gotten it, but like it's helpful that it.
Yeah, it's like a nice bow on top. Yeah, brings the audience back to who they are.
Yeah, and there's like tangible things that connect the Vegas story. Like, he has his credit card. There's a scene in the hotel where he calls Todd clearly because like you can hear that conversation on Todd's end in the Rana story,
right?
And you don't realize it's interesting in that scene too because Todd looks at Claire and I think he says something along the lines of like, I don't know, maybe, and then you realize that that Simon asked him, he was like, oh, you're gonna fuck her, and that's what he was responding to. But yeah, there's little things like that, but like it feels like a little too tangible, I guess. I mean, I guess it's enough to make it work.
It's enough, yeah, but like it's like the bare minimum.
And there are some funny lines in that sequence. I mean, that group of guys were really fun.
Yeah,
to kind of 100%. Be with during that. I love that everyone thinks Taye Diggs like the outfit that he's wearing, the jacket.
Yeah,
where because Simon makes fun of it, and then that one white guy thinks he's a bathroom attendant and like tips him.
Even the guy thinks that he's the guy that hands him
the valet, valet, right? Yeah. That's why he takes the car.
I couldn't take that yellow jacket seriously at all. It was like the worst shade of mustard yellow. I could never picture somebody wearing that. It was real bad. He did look kind of like a valet, honestly.
Yeah, and I love when someone's like, yeah, it's a good jacket. He's like, oh yeah, you think so? And he just leaves the elevator just laughing. And he's like, well, what about your shirt? This isn't Hawaii. Like the way he gets like all mad about it. Yeah, it was really, they had some funny stuff. I thought Breckin Meyer, even though the white guy who thinks he's black trope was even played out
I forgot about that. That was bad.
Played out then, but there are some funny lines in it. But I mean, with the whole like, my mother's mother was black.
Right.
And there's some funny things in it, but like, they all look like they're having fun. And apparently those guys really bonded in Vegas during filming that. So you kind of could tell they did.
The white guy dropping even though it's an A and not a hard R, but him dropping that was, man, cringe to watch, to listen to. But it didn't, I mean, it wasn't like anything that took me out of the story, but I was like, oh, this is such a 90s thing that everyone thought was funny back then. I just don't get it. But,
yeah,
what definitely played.
I think he says like color is a state of mind, Marcus.
Yeah, that was funny. Everything else about the conversation, I was like giggling at, but that part I was like, oh man.
Yeah, there's some good interactions in it, and it's for sure it's fun, and it feels longer than the other ones. I guess I don't know if it is. It might be the same amount of time, but like
I think the Rana storyline was the shortest. It felt that way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it actually came down to that, like runtime wise, but it felt like it was the quickest, and maybe just because I was enjoying it the most, I was like, oh damn, it's over before I wanted it to be, but. To its credit, the Zach and Adam storyline does tie in really nice to Ron, as we see a lot more of that predicament and how it ties into her storyline more than the Vegas segment. So I felt like we were back in that same story afterwards. And I know I said the Ron one was my favorite, but I really liked the Zach and Adam one. It also threw me for a loop. I was completely naive to the fact that they were lovers. I did not.
Yeah, I like
scene. Yeah, it definitely. I did not see that coming, and it surprised me. I'll give the movie credit where it's due.
I love that they drop subtle hints, and then finally, once those subtle hints are done, and Katie Holmes just gets that line where she's like, they walk by her, and she's like, "Gay men are so hot."
I didn't think they were gay at that time. Drops that line. I just thought she must assume that they are because they're in the grocery store together or something.
Yeah,
it wasn't until they're talking about how they,
She's like, it's tragic.
Yeah. But it wasn't until the line, and even the first hint that I really picked up that something was, I couldn't really place my finger on it, but when they're in the back of the car on their way to like William Fichtner's driving them to the grocery store to set up the deal where they think they're going to get Simon to hook them up with the ecstasy. And he kind of, they're having that conversation about how, I can't remember if it's Zach or Adam that says it first, but how he thinks that his girlfriend is cheating on him because he saw different pair of socks in his drawer, like ones that he knew he didn't have. And then Zach or Adam, I can't remember who, questions him and he goes, yeah, but you've been fucking around too though, haven't you? And there was a weird part of that dynamic that I was like, this doesn't seem like buddies this isn't like how they would have this conversation if they were genuine friends. So, but I wasn't going down the route. My brain wasn't taking me down the rabbit hole that they were lovers. I just went right over my head. And it wasn't until they're having the conversation where they realized that they both cheated on each other with the same guy I was like, oh my God, I just did not get, and it's not like the movie. I think I was just naive. It wasn't that the movie didn't leave enough breadcrumbs. I just wasn't picking them up. And then in hindsight, I was like, oh, okay, this was more obvious than I thought. I just didn't think it was going there, but definitely a slick screenplay addition for sure.
Yeah. Jay Mohr plays Zach. And I love the scene when he's sitting in the back of the car with William Fichtner. And I think he asked him like if he has a girlfriend and whatever. And he's describing who this person is. And he's describing Scott Wolf. And you don't really realize that until later.
No.
You know, I think he says like 5'8", 5'10" with like blue eyes, all that stuff. And then you're like, oh yeah. Later on, you're describing it. And I thought that was really funny. And for people that want to know, like they are both soap opera actors. It seems like they're soap opera actors that were, I guess,
on the TV show
together. They're characters on the TV show together, and they got busted for possession. And so that's why they're involved in this whole like kind of sting to get the main guy who has been selling drugs. And honestly, I forgot it's Zach who kind of, we learn later in their story that warns Ron, even though she already knows that something is wrong. When he walks by her, he actually tells her to go. Like they slow it down so she, you know that he's the one that warned her. So that's how they're involved in this little story. And then you just have to be all in on the movie. That once this little sting doesn't work, and they're like, "Hey, you promised like whether we get the guy or not, this is over for us, right?"
Right.
And it's over. But now William Fichtner is clearly either closeted or something's going on because he seems like he's very into them, or maybe just Zach. I don't know. And now it started this whole, and because they've already gotten the sense that he's weird, and then when he says, "Well, now this is all done. I got a proposition for you," and I know how it cuts back to them, and you think they're gonna like probably thinking like, "Oh, he's gonna proposition us for like sex or something," and he's like, "Oh, like my wife, my Irene, like Irene's my wife," and they're like, "Oh, like, basically come to like dinner with them, Christmas dinner, and then it gets just weirder, I guess. And you just have to be all in on what it's doing at that point.
I felt for those guys when they get to, I don't even know what his character's name was, William Fichtner Burke, when they get to his house and it seems normal at first. His wife is preparing Christmas dinner and they're sitting down to have it. And they're like, clearly they're just in it so that he'll sign this document releasing them of, you know, their obligations and clear their names or whatever. But when Zach goes into Burke's like bedroom for whatever reason, and he's just standing there naked, like it's completely normal, and having a conversation and pointing things out, and Zach is like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is so weird. And then he like forces him to like plop down in the bed. I was like, oh my God, like where is this going? Is like, you know, how far over their head are they really in this situation? Did not expect it to go that way at all. And I honestly thought it was a pretty funny subversion from where I thought Burke's character was going to go. Admittedly, I don't think.
And his wife is weird too. Like the whole thing is weird. Like
the whole dynamic is strange.
They're together and they're swingers, or like there's like this whole thing, like this whole weird dynamic that's going on. Because she's like doing the whole thing with the potatoes, and she's just staring at Adam the entire time, and they're both very good at playing uncomfortable really well.
Right.
Scott Wolf and Jay Mohr are really good at that.
Hilariously really good.
Because I bought that completely, and it just makes those scenes a lot funnier. Like their confusion and their like kind of like, how do we get into this kind of thing? Which is what it seems like the whole movie is a series of like, how do we get ourselves into this?
Very much so. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we have to get to the point where we find out they're the ones that hit Rana with the car.
Yes.
And I was immediately taken back to when I saw it in theaters. And I'm not saying it's right, but the biggest laugh on that night when I saw it in theaters was when they hit her and they both start screaming, and they're screaming clearly like women. And I
Yes.
know that it's a really like not great stereotype to like
For sure.
stereotype two gay men as being like feminine, but the whole theater like erupted in laughter.
It is a funny moment.
Yeah. And then it's just a series of unfortunate. They leave her there, and then they realize that like, oh, like we can't just leave her there like this. And then they realize like, oh, that could have been like he had to wear wire and all that.
And he didn't think about. I know that part. I was like, oh my god. On top of this problem they're in, where they're having this moral debate about do they go back and risk either getting caught or if she could still be alive and there might not be a crime if they go back and help her out, and then to find out that Adam still has the wire taped to him the whole time, and this this whole scenario could have been being listened to by the cops, was such a cherry on top to that dilemma that I thought was hilarious. Yeah. And inevitably, they make the right decision and go back and set her up on a different car to make it look like she'd been beaten up, and then some other passersby end up helping her out. But hilarious predicament.
Yeah, hilariously, it's the kids that she sold the placebo drugs to that like end up calling the ambulance for her. But I love when they have Zach trying to like lift her up, and he needs like Adam's help, and Adam is like breaks down and is crying. He's like, I just can't do this, I can't. And he's like trying to tell him like, yo, pretend like we're on it's a scene, and like like she's playing dead, and I'm like pretending to help her, and then he's like, he says like Molly for wardrobe, say hi to Molly, and he's like, hi Molly. Like that whole scene was like really, really funny.
100%.
All that, I love that. Actually, that they're probably my second, second favorite of
close tie to first, but just a little bit in the second place for me too. I really like that segment.
And like we said, while Claire doesn't get her own story, like pretty much the last 10 minutes or so of the movie is her being left seemingly alone. She's like, where are my friends? And she ends up at a diner, and Todd is there, and she is definitely more open to talking to him. And I love like how she does most of the talking at first, and she just kind of sits down, and he's like looking at her like, the hell are you doing here?
Yeah.
And then she grabs like 2 cups for coffee, and then the lady pours it in one, and then she like steps, she's like, no, she wants it in the other one too. Like all these like little like quirks that he's like, and then he finally just goes with it, I guess. And like they end up having a meal and having a conversation, and he asks her what she's on, because clearly she's on something.
Right.
And I know it's like a cool fun, like, because her character isn't fleshed out at all. She doesn't really have a ton to do, but they did give her a lot of like little things that were fun and kind of fun character moments and beats to have, because she is the innocent one, and it's kind of cool that she tries to let her hair down a bit, and then she like gets caught up with because from the Vegas story, the bouncer that got shot in the arm, his dad and him, of course, are looking now for Todd, at least thinking that because Simon had Todd's credit card, and they end up at Todd's apartment, and that scene is hilarious too. Just at watching Todd draw the map, he's like, "This is Simon. This is where he lives.
Yeah, this is exactly where he's going to be. Yeah, go get him. Yeah,
and giving him proper LA directions to avoid traffic, which I thought is also only probably really funny if you live here. But that description was actually really dead on. And then that scene is so ridiculous. And then Katie Holmes is kind of almost like the audience, where she's looking at them like, you can't be serious.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you gonna? I'm a witness. Hello, and then love when Todd's like, Claire, shut the fuck up.
Look up.
that was one of the funnier moments in the movie for me.
Yeah, because they're like, so Simon bursts into the apartment, and they're like, oh, that's Simon, and they're gonna shoot him, and then Claire just like screaming, and she just yells, stop it. And like that guy, because it's funny, like all these badasses, like he has a gun and like whatever, and the only insult he can come up with is shut up when she like yells.
Right.
But I love that line too, where she's like, hello witness, what are you gonna do, shoot us both? And he's like, shut the fuck up, Claire.
Yeah.
Like, don't get us involved in this. And then just cuts to them like kind of like doing the whole like X on the arm thing, like I shot you in the arm, now you get to shoot me in the arm. And
I was gonna say, I love that. I think it's Claire. She goes, "What do you want?" Like to the bouncer guys, and he goes, "Vengeance or justice, rather." He says,
"Justice."
And I don't think there's no time spent setting up what's gonna happen. We just cut to like Simon drawing the X on his arm, which is like, okay, this is what I did to the bouncer. So justice would be, getting it back in return. I thought that was a cool little screenplay nod there, and then when he doesn't have the balls to do it and he can't bring himself to pull the trigger,
and
I
his
thought
dad's
that was
so mad.
Yeah.
He's like it's different when like they know you're gonna do it. He's like, no, what's the difference? He's like, you just shoot him, boom, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then when she gets up and leaves, and she's like, where are you going? She's like, I gotta go to work. And he's like, see, the lady's leaving. Like that whole scene is ridiculous, but it works for the tone of the movie. And I guess that scene was supposed to end more violent, and they made it more comedic. Like it was supposed to like be a not funny scene, and they're like, "No, we should make it funny." Like everyone likes Simon. Everyone likes Simon, and we need to. And they want to put that button on like the gunshot for him being like, "Oh, that's all right, I'm okay," and like to kind of be like, "Oh yeah, he's fine," and it was played for laughs rather than like making it serious.
I think I would have more appreciated a serious scene than the played for laughs.
Then the comedian one.
Redo it. Yeah, because like honestly, I know Simon's a likable character for the most part, but as a viewer, honestly, like him getting himself into all this trouble, I was like, you are making such bad decisions. Like I kind of wanted him to have like reparations. So I think it would have come full circle if he had just got the bullet in the arm. I would have been okay with it, but it is what it is.
Well, it's interesting because Doug Liman, his direction that Desmond Askew played in was to play every scene you're in, especially the Vegas stuff, like you're a wide-eyed puppy dog. And because you're he did that right. You're experiencing all this stuff for the first time, and that's why it's fun. And he does really convey that well. Like even though he does get them in a
bind,
but he does play the whole like kind of wide-eyed innocence. Like
yes, he does.
Well, so
knowing that was the direction given to him, then I guess I got to give him props because he very much plays it that way.
Yeah. And kudos to Rana for still going back to work after waking up in the hospital.
What a night! And everyone still ends up back at work. I guess I forgot actually. Yes, they show up to work and wonder where Manny's at. And I actually really think I wouldn't be surprised if Todd Phillips himself was inspired by this movie, because that final scene where they got to go find Manny and they've kind of forgotten about where they left him amongst all the madness is basically a shrunken down version of The Hangover. I wouldn't be surprised if Todd Phillips was like, "Oh, I like that. I'm going to make a movie out of just that
pretty
alone."
Much like that, yeah. Because like I love that they kind of like, because it's interesting too. Because Sarah Polley also plays this moment really kind of sweet, where she initially has to hide him when because he's so high, and she promises that she's going to come back for him, and like they said that they wanted her to play it that way too, because what you're seeing is so like him just so messed up. And they kind of did something with her voice in the editing to make her sound a little bit more angelic, a little bit more like this is like her being like a friend. Like, I promise I'm going to come back for you. Like making sure that he was good. And I love that kind of like she comes to work and then she's like, "Oh, where's Manny?" And she's like, "Oh, fuck me." Like and by the way, sometimes you can look at characters and just feel what they've gone through when they find him and he's covered in like dirt and he just is sweaty and cold. Like, and I'm sure it smells like ass. Like the whole thing is just like so disgusting.
Poor guy had quite a night.
True friendship though. They went back and got him.
Yeah,
and they ended up finding the car keys too. Like everything they needed to take off.
Remember. Yeah, Katie Holmes finds the keys in like a puddle, but I don't remember the scene when I didn't even know the keys were lost. Maybe I wasn't looking.
I actually wasn't paying attention to you, but I'm assuming they were at some point. I didn't really pay attention to that either.
Moral of the story is it all works out.
And also it's interesting too, because I guess when John August wrote it, when Doug Liman took it on, they both wanted to do a movie where it's like sometimes when you're young you do really, really stupid things, and then do you learn from them or not? But like he wanted to convey at the end that because they're young, they don't necessarily learn anything, because like they wanted it to be on that line where Manny's had all this kind of high experience where he's just been left by himself the entire night. Rana's had her night, Claire's had her night, everyone's had these like crazy nights, and it is all on this like kind of button line, like, so like what are we gonna do for New Year's? And that is like what they want to leave it on, is that like when you're young, you don't necessarily, you could have a crazy night like that and want to do it all over again. And that is what they wanted to sell as like, this is what the movie isn't necessarily all about, but like this is kind of like the experience of people who are that age, who put themselves in situations like this. They don't necessarily learn from them, and it's almost like kind of like catching that kind of fun, extra
chasing the high again. I really like the note the film ended on with the person that arguably had the worst night, Manny, is kind of in the back seat, and puts his shoulder or his arms on the girl's shoulders and goes, you know, what are we doing for New Year's? I thought that was a super great line to end on, and just kind of proves that, like, you know, there was no lesson learned here. And it would have felt too Hollywood and too common for like there to be some lesson to be slapped on at the end of the movie. Like, oh yeah, we made some dumb mistakes. Let's not do this again. But I just thought it was, like you said, way more realistic and poignant for people that age to just, you know, learn the lesson later. Let's see what else we can get up to. I thought that was just a perfect cherry on top to a great whirlwind of a plot.
Yeah.
So overall, quite enjoyed it.
What a fun little experience it is. And that's I think it's a really smart script too. I love seeing directors at like at directors at the beginning of their directing, you know, humble beginnings, I guess. And you kind of see like maybe little things, like you mentioned the whole like the car chase thing, and seeing how that maybe he was able to do stuff with that for Born Identity, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, like just seeing the start and then like the growth later, and then also all these actors who were just kind of breaking out around this time.
Yeah, totally.
And who later become bigger established stars. But like we said, Go was released on April 9th, 1999 to great critical acclaim, 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. Wow. A lot, like we said earlier, because of its irreverent and frequently off-topic dialogue, fast-paced, rapidly changing point of view, and non-chronological format, the film is generally categorized as one of many movies of varying quality that attempted to capture the style of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, and most critics believe that they did. Roger Ebert liked the movie, said Go is an entertaining, clever black comedy that takes place entirely in Tarantino land. Go has energy and wit, and the performances are right for the material, especially Sarah Polley, who thinks fast and survives harrowing experiences, and Fichtner, the cop, who is so remarkably open to new experiences. The New York Times loved the movie as well. A lot of people say that it is endured as a cult classic because of the time period in which it was made and the culture that it captured at the time. It really was kind of one of those movies they believe, even though it wasn't hugely financially successful, it really does capture that period in a really interesting and fun way. And they said of all of the Tarantino, they say ripoff. A lot of people say ripoffs. They feel that it's not a good thing to call Go a ripoff because they think it can stand alongside of it, at least in terms of style, as like a kind of like nice little sister to Pulp Fiction, which I guess is a really good.
That is a good analogy. Yeah, little sister. I like it.
Good. Yeah,
I agree. I think the comparisons are valid, but it's not to be labeled like a ripoff or even like too inspired. Like inspired by, I would cut it off at there because it definitely stands on its own 2 feet for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess this is the time where we have to grade it. Here we go.
I would definitely enjoyed it. Like I've been kind of toying in my head about if I wanted to go as high as 4, because I feel like a 3.5 like is like lower than I want to give it. So I know this is kind of bending the rules a bit, but I kind of want to. I think it exists in this category where I'd give it like a 3.75 because I liked it more than a 3.5, but maybe not quite as much as I'd give it. Like there's a lot of other great movies I give 4s to. I feel like it exists somewhere in between, but overall, I really liked it. It was one of those great, pleasant surprises. And of the class of 99 movies that we've, been covering this year on their 25th anniversaries, like this is definitely probably like a top 3. So very, very much enjoyed it. Yeah. But what about you? I know it's been 10 years since you'd seen it. How did it hold up? And what's your final rating?
I think it holds up really well. I love the script. I love Doug Liman's direction. I think the entire ensemble cast is good, but of course, MVPs being Sarah Polley and Timothy Olyphant.
Definitely.
I give it a 4. Like I was an easy kind of 4, and I know I've given a lot of the movies 4s lately. I've been living in 4 land so far.
Yeah.
But it's fun and it's good. It's fast paced. I know I made the comment about the Vegas story feeling longer, but as a film as a whole, I think it moves really quick and it's not like doesn't overstay its welcome.
Right.
And now everyone's kind of fun and likable in their own way, and it's what an interesting idea for a movie to basically kind of showcase what happens to certain people after a certain point of the night on a really wild night out. I mean, like, you said The Hangover and stuff like that. This is a probably, I don't want to say darker because it's not that dark, but like it is a different spin
for sure. Definitely different spin.
How things can go awry. And I guess that makes the tagline "Life begins at 3 a.m." make more sense for the film itself. I think it captures that kind of youth culture at the time really well. That whole scene is really captured extremely well. Like I said, I think it's crazy to both of us that Doug Liman was not a raver at all and never did the one.
No, the guy
this
knew.
Movie.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to know is that energy from that scene, just that the rave scene, is captured throughout the whole film, even if the whole film doesn't take place entirely in that environment. I think that energy is kind of
pretty
felt
consistent
throughout the
100%.
whole thing. So like it just makes it a really fun kind of visual and visceral kind of experience too. On top of that,
yep.
And I had a lot of fun with it. I won't let that much time go between watching it again.
I would definitely put some buddies onto this. I think would like it for sure. I'll be recommending it to some buddies that I think would enjoy it. This would be one. Cam recently watched Swingers, and I don't think we'd ever talked about Go before. So I'll be bringing that up with him probably tomorrow. He'll be joining me in watching The Witch, and I will make sure to give Go some love.
Nice. And also too, I might have to, like some of people have, I might need to add this to my unconventional Christmas time.
Yeah, I think it deserves the spot. Yeah, we even get a Christmas dinner scene. So
yeah, because I kind of forgot about the Christmas angle a little bit. I remember that they brought it up on the Cult Worthy podcast, and I was like, oh yeah, it is. Like, but then I was like, how much of it takes place? And it is like, I mean, it is, the whole thing is around it. Like, and you hear some Christmas songs as well. So
true.
It's a good. You can go up there with like, you know, Gremlins and Batman Returns, unconventional
certainly
Christmas movies. But yeah, a fun little revisit from the class of 1999. And I'm glad that I think another thing with the marketing too is that they did, with certain people being in the movie, one angle that they did try to push was maybe try to sell it as one of those other 1999 young adult movies as one way to promote it, and that probably wasn't the right way to do it either, because it's rated R. I mean, I know there were other R-rated, you know, teen movies at the time, but this wasn't going to be something that was going to be sold. I mean, I know I saw it, but it wasn't going to be sold to most people who were seeing those movies. And I think it also got unfairly lumped in for a little bit, at least, with those films too, because of who was in it. And
yeah, you know, fair enough. But it definitely stands apart from, I think, your traditional 90s, you know, young adult targeted movie. It doesn't feel very much like that at all by the end of the movie.
Yeah, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm always a little, worried when I'm like, oh, how's this gonna go? And I know we've done the whole like not talking about it. It works out better, I think, for the episode when we don't discuss it beforehand.
Yeah,
but it is strange though, because we'll talk about everything else, like whether it's like, what did you do this weekend, or what are we covering for news, or here's this crazy story. And if we have an anniversary episode, that doesn't get mentioned at all.
I know. I don't know what it is, but
other than like, this is the one we're doing. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah.
Before I sign us off, we've got some box office news to cover. This weekend, Alex Garland's, I know you're excited for it too, but long anticipated next movie, Civil War, is coming out. I cannot wait for this movie to drop. I don't know anything about what it's tracking. I'm sure you got those numbers, but let's find out, because I can't wait to see. This will be one I'm checking out this weekend for sure. I don't know. Do you plan on seeing it opening weekend?
I am actually. I had a screening scheduled for it today, but it got pushed to tomorrow, so I'm actually seeing it tomorrow.
Nice, exciting.
And I had an Abigail screening for it tomorrow, but then that got moved to another day. So like, I'll be seeing a lot of those early. The early roll in Abigail, by the way, is pretty amazing too. It premiered at some festival. And good early word on that. Do you happen to have our predictions for the first Omen in front of you? Because I kind of forgot to throw them up.
Yes, I don't know how it did, but I do have. I
have that in front of me. It opened to $8.3 million in fourth place.
Okay.
What did I say? I forgot what I said.
You went with 11 million. I think you jeopardied me, because I went with 10. Yeah,
and then you went again.
It opened lower than I would have definitely. I guess lower than we both thought. But
it opened way below tracking. And one of the things
you hear? I heard great things about this movie, and I
heard very shit. Well, here's the deal. I've heard great things from people in horror circles that really enjoyed it, and they're still praising it on Twitter X. It got a C cinema score, so I don't think casual people love it.
Okay.
Casual people aren't loving it, and it had a $30 million budget, so it's going to need to do some work to make that back. Same thing happened with Monkey Man. That opened to 10.1 million, slightly below tracking another movie that was getting a lot of praise online. I think what you're kind of seeing is that these kind of niche, in that case, an action movie, and this one being a horror movie, don't always work with everyone else. Like,
right.
Yeah, you have to take it with a grain of salt when a lot of these movies get early praise. There's certain movies that get early praise where you can tell, like, oh, everyone's going to enjoy that. And then there's other movies where it's like, that might be just for a select few. But I've heard great things from people I trust that the first Omen was amazing.
What I'm saying. Yeah, me too. From some TikTokers and some people like on social media that I follow and trust their word. I was taken aback. I was like, I didn't think I would hear anything good about this movie, but lo and behold, people are really enjoying it. So interesting.
Yeah.
So what's Civil War tracking at? Yeah. I know this movie is A24's most expensive to date. It's got a $50 million budget. Hoping it does really well because their last expensive endeavor in 2023's Beau is Afraid did not make them any money.
Yeah. It's interesting because what's been brought up, and it's something I think we brought up in the last one of the last episodes where we talked about the movie, is how much will it appeal to just anyone? I mean, is there going to be like a real, because it seems like a polarizing kind of movie too, at least the subject matter. Will that entice people to be who are curious, or will it turn some people away? That's
probably
what's being brought up now.
It's been called the cinematic end of the year, so
yeah, but A24 is certainly marketing it like it's a big movie, and it is their biggest, so they might as well. So on the low end, 18 million opening weekend. The high end right now is 25.
Oh boy, okay, that's quite the gap,
and that's such a gap. And I could in my brain I can see it breaking out and then also not breaking out. So it's really weird. Like
I think people since Dune are looking for something big to go see. So I have faith in it, and it's not competing with a whole lot. It's not at any like significant event that would keep people away from the theater. So I feel like this movie's got a great release date. But I'll let you go first because I've kind of predicted first the last few times. So let me know what you're thinking.
All right, I'm gonna go with, even though I'm hoping for even more than the high end, but I'm gonna play a little safe. I'm gonna go 23.
Okay, I will raise your 23 and go to the high part of the opening and go with 25. I really hope it does more. I hope it hits 30. That would be fantastic. But
that'd be interesting if it did. Yeah, and now, well, does it have international appeal? Because it feels like such an American story.
It very much is.
I mean, kudos to them for spending $50 million on it. I mean, that's
true. Looks fantastic.
A24 takes some chances all the time, and even if they don't always pay off,
you got to admire them as a studio.
Yeah, I want them to do well. And just a quick other box office news: Godzilla X Kong is still number one by default because nothing really big came out this weekend. It has made 134.5 million domestic so far and 361.1 million worldwide. It had a $31.2 million opening weekend or second weekend. It dropped 61%, but honestly, it's doing so well internationally and globally that doesn't even matter.
Okay,
you guys support it. And then Ghostbusters Frozen Empire has made 9 million this weekend, down 42%. 88.8 million domestic so far, is running, they said, about 14% behind Afterlife. But they said that movie did open over Thanksgiving, so that could play a part in that a little bit. And Dune Part 2, 265 million so far to date domestically after a $7.4 million sixth weekend. Is now made 665.4 million worldwide, still going strong. And
nice, love to see it.
And honestly, based on early word, it looks like Zendaya has another hit on her hands because everyone who has seen Challengers so far says it's amazing.
Is that this month? Yeah,
it comes out the end of April. They've been screening it for the last 2 weeks, and the early reactions from it is that it's very, very, very good. They said that she proves that she's a movie star in it. Everyone is praising the Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross score. They said that it pumps.
Oh, I did not know they were doing the score there. That's awesome.
And they are saying that it's that director's best movie to them so far. So that is quite a compliment. So kind of can't wait for that to come out.
I know you've been excited for that. Me too. I'll be seeing that first chance I get for sure. Yeah. So yeah, April feels like it's kicking off the movie. I know March had Dune Part 2, but April really feels like we're getting a big bang for our buck and gonna take us into the summer release calendar. Very excited for the movies still coming to theaters in 2024. We got lots to see. and lots to cover on the show in some later episodes. Unless there's anything else, I think it's time to wrap her up.
Yes, that's it.
Episode 165 is under the belt, guys. Thanks if you're still listening. Thank you for joining us for another week and another episode of Back to the Blockbuster. Thanks for diving into Doug Liman's Go with us. It's been a blast covering this movie, and stay tuned to see our box office results following week. We got lots of more episodes coming at you. It's going to be a busy month of April for the guys here Back to the Blockbuster. We got some special episodes coming at you later. Still got 3 anniversary episodes to tackle, so we will be delivering those to you guys too before the month is up, and we'll have some guests on some episodes later in the month too. So you guys check out all our episodes wherever it is you guys get our podcasts. Anywhere on social media at the handle at Back to the Blockbuster. You can check us out and vote on some stories that we have coming your way. And of course, don't be afraid to check us out on the Playlist app. They're our network, and got to give them some shout out and some love because they take good care of us over there. So thank you, Playlist. And until next time, guys, we'll see you on episode 166. Thanks, and take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.